All right, easy question to start things off. What's your favorite verse of the Bible? Okay, define transubstantiation if you want something a little different. No, your favorite verse of the Bible? John 3:16. You knew that one was coming. Philippians 4:13. 1 Peter 5:7.
Romans 8:28.
8:28. Say it, Darren. Psalm 23. All right. Genesis 3:15. That should be a big one, huh? 91:11. Okay. Not as familiar with some of those. 91:11. A lot of different favorite verses. How about this question? What's the most important verse in the Bible? Or even, how would you determine what's the most important verse in the Bible? Or are you afraid to even say? Because if you say one's the most important, that means the rest of them aren't as important. And next week especially, we're going to talk about the words of God, not just the Word of God. The Bible is the words of God. Can we say one verse is more important? We can if the Bible tells us that. That would certainly be it. If it says this is the most important verse. It doesn't tell us that. So can we do it without? We know we could if that's the case. Can we say it without? And again, what would be the basis? How would you determine what's the most important verse in the Bible?
Are you talking about important in general or important to yourself?
Important in general. Yeah, your favorite verse is probably important to yourself. You know, it's met some need. It was there at a special time.
Don't we bring everything back to the Bible and test it that way?
We do. There's also, and I always get confused, inductive or deductive. Again, if the Bible came out and said this is the most important verse, that would be true. The other way, and that'd be one of those inductive or deductive, and then the other one, whichever, I can never remember. Sherlock Holmes is one, deductive. It's if you saw what it, and here's the test I would propose. It's sort of like, when they were arguing, who's the most valuable player in football, and their criterion was if you took that player away from the team, who would have the biggest impact if they weren't there? And so you think about that. If you took a Bible verse out of the Bible, which verse would have the most impact? If it and what it tells us, John 3:16 would certainly be up there. God so loved the world, He gave His one and only Son.
Genesis 1:1.
Yeah, I know. Maybe you guys are just trying to be nice because it's on the handout, which is good. I thought, man, I'm going to give the handout and everyone's going to know this. I'm going to make the case today for Genesis 1:1 because you think about it, as important as John 3:16 is, and that'd probably be, right on the next level. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. Take that away, you take away the whole foundation of everything. And in fact, one thing to keep in mind, a lot of people, what's the most important thing God has ever done? And we, probably say Jesus on the cross. We need to realize it's creation. And that was His original intention. His intention was not to have redemption, not to have the cross. It was to create and have a relationship. We screwed that up, and God put into effect Plan B. But creation is the most important. It was God's primary purpose, and to have that relationship, and the cross is necessary to restore that relationship. But this verse is foundational. What you believe about this verse will impact your entire life. And what a group of people believes about the principles, what we find, the truth in this verse, where you stand on it, will impact a culture or a society. It's that foundational. We are starting a series, a short series, which compared to the last one, anything short, 42 weeks in Matthew, but this one is 3 weeks. It's called Nutshell Theology. Theology in a nutshell. What do you need to know? And I've realized recently that when it comes down to it, there are really 3 questions that are just essential for facing life. The first one is there a God or not? And then the second question, if there is a God, is the Bible His Word? Because it doesn't necessarily follow, absolutely for sure. And then, if the Bible is God's Word, what does it say? in general or specific topic. Really, that's how you face life, isn't it? Is there a God? Okay, is the Bible His Word? All right, what's it say? That's how we face our life. That's how we should face our life, how we should live our life. And really, everyone does. They just may have, again, at the first question, is there a God, come to the conclusion, no. And so they don't need to ask the next two. But people live their life based on those questions there. And so we're going to look at this series. We're going to start with God. Next week we're going to look at the Bible. And then the week after that we're going to see just the general message of what the Bible says to us. And so today as we look at God, I put forth this idea that faith in God or not, again, if you believe there is a God or you don't believe there's a God, is foundational to life. It's key to your worldview. Last week Peter mentioned some worldviews. Scientism and materialism, and those fall within the no God view. Because if you had to go to the ultimate distinction of worldviews, how you view the world, the one that would divide them all, yes or no, is do you believe there's a God or not? If you believe there's a God, that's going to put you in an entirely different worldview perspective than if you deny there's a God. This is absolutely foundational. Absolutely foundational. And two things as we talk about faith in God or not is foundational. And I mentioned these a few weeks ago, but I want to say them again because it's just been, the opposite has been so ingrained in all of us, in our society. Two things about faith. First of all, both positions are based on faith. You realize that. People who have faith there is a God, and people who have faith there's not a God. And that, we don't even usually word it that way, do we? Faith there's not a God. But both of them are based on faith. And very often we're told, or it's implied in society, that if you have faith in God, that there's the one, you can have faith in God or not. And the not then sort of seems like, well, that must be the facts and the evidence and reason and logic. Faith's on this side and all that other stuff's denying God is on the other. No, it's not. Both positions are based on faith. Neither one is based on sight, proof. No one has proven there's not a God. No one has proven, really, there is a God. There's evidence for both, and that's what we need to realize. And sometimes we don't even talk that way because we talk about belief and unbelief, in God. And so, again, if it's unbelief, if it's not belief, it must be something else. Well, the opposite of belief, and it just sort of strengthens the case of people who deny God, makes it sound like they've got the facts on their side and all we have is faith. Both positions are based on faith. Whether you believe there's a God, whether you believe there's not, you have faith. There's a God, you have faith, there's not. Both are based on faith. And second, faith in God is based on evidence. Faith itself, the definition is belief based on evidence. I don't have faith in God despite the evidence. I don't have faith in God without evidence or contrary to the evidence. I have faith in God based on evidence. Some people have faith there's not a God based on how they perceive the evidence. But both positions, faith, belief based on evidence. Does that make sense? You realize that? Because if you give that up at first, you've dug yourself a hole about 6 feet deep. And you're trying to fight with someone, argue with someone, again, and not in a mean way, but to have this debate, this discussion. And again, you put yourself in a huge hole right off the bat. If you surrender reason and evidence to them and say, oh, well, I've just got faith on my side. Both sides are based on faith. Evidence, belief based on evidence. The other thing that often comes up is usually faith in God is the position that's challenged. It's the one attacked. And so I thought we'll take an opposite approach today, and we're going to put the people who have faith there isn't a God. And we're going to make them defend their position, so to speak. And so that's how I've worded it. The first thing today is, what do people have to have faith in to deny God? You ever think about it that way? People who deny, what do they have to have faith in? They probably never even heard that, but let's think, what do they have to have faith in? Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. This verse in the entire Bible never argues for God, it assumes God. There is no place in the Bible that makes the argument, here's how we know there's a God. It just assumes from here, and other things, the heavens declare the glory of God. It doesn't argue for that, just assumes. And it's some logic. Now, assuming is usually a bad thing, but these are some logical assumptions that underlie this. That if you stop and think about it, just makes sense. Well, of course there's a God. And so before we get to any details of, people get to details of evolution, which is sort of the related opposite view. If there's not a God, well, how'd things get here? Evolution, Big Bang, such. Before you get to details of evolution and things evolving, you have to deal with these first two assumptions. And here they are. What do people have to have faith in to deny God? First of all, that something can come from nothing. You have to have faith. If you deny there's a God, you have to have faith that something can come from nothing. Now, it seems obvious, right, that something can't come from nothing. And it used to be, but apparently it's not anymore. Apparently someone has put forth a theory of how something can come from nothing. I read this. It was actually someone talking about another TED Talk, Budimir Zdravkovic. I mean, you gotta love saying that. That's pretty cool. Should have named a child that. He talks about this. A TED Talk. He says, we abandon, talking about culture, scientists, mankind, he hopes, we abandon mechanistic explanations of nature with the emergence of Newtonian physics, where unseen forces can exert physical effects on objects. He's saying, so we've gotten past this idea that used to be obvious, something can't come from nothing. He says, we abandon that. Modern physics is concerned with mathematically consistent and comprehensive theories which can predict events in reality. It is less concerned with offering mechanistic explanations and defining concepts such as materialism. What he seems to be saying, and yeah, it took me a while, math and physics can now predict what is possible. They offer no explanation of how, but they somehow have said this is what is possible, and so they're thinking now something can come from nothing. Now, a little more detail, though still isn't so much the how, but what they're predicting. He says physicists like Stephen Hawking propose that when time is smaller than the Planck length. Now, I've heard about the Planck length in movies and things, and it's a very small length. And here's how big a plank is. It's not like a plank that, walk the plank. This is what they've come up with in science. A plank is 1.6 meters. So that's fairly long, 1.5 meters, a little more than that, times 10 to the negative 35th. So 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, 35 times, and you're moving the decimal back each time. So extremely small, that's a Planck. What he's saying, physicists like Hawking propose that when time is smaller than the Planck length, and I didn't know time was measured like in length, but it is unstable and may not exist as we experience it. However, through physics and mathematics, Hawking has demonstrated that from this unstable condition, a universe can emerge, so something can come of nothing. That's the proposal. When time is shorter than the Planck length, the universe is unstable. In another one, more on what, but still no how, Brian Greene in another TED Talk said this. We have a huge amount of energy stored in the fabric of space-time. That's what they consider before there was any matter, the fabric of space-time. A quantum fluctuation releases some of that energy as a Big Bang, creating a universe. That quantum fluctuation is what he's saying when time is shorter than a Planck length. That's a quantum fluctuation, and it releases some of that energy as a Big Bang, creating a universe. So that's sort of how, in some sense. This process has gone on in the past and continues today, creating an infinite number of universes. We see the Big Bang not as a unique event, but as a regular event that fits with a logical, consistent physical process. So it didn't just happen once, it continues to happen, and there's an infinite number of universes as a result. In fact, he says a physics that allows unique events, that it only happened once, is unpredictable and borders on magic. So, again, do you see what they're saying? So finally, there is a theory of how something can come from nothing. The theory is a mathematical prediction with no real how, and it includes infinite universes. Who's living by faith here? In things that not only haven't, but can't be proven? Again, so as you talk about something arising from nothing, again, there used to be no explanation. Now there's an explanation. Okay, fine. Which position you're saying I'm the one that's blind faith? You're saying they're saying there's an infinite number of universes. Infinite. That's not just a few, that's limitless number of parallel universes. That's their explanation for how something can arise from nothing so that we can have a universe without God. So that's the first thing. What do people have to have faith in who deny there's a God? First of all, they have to have faith that something can come from nothing, and that's what they have to have faith in, this time, Planck, quantum fluctuation thing. The second thing you have to have faith in, if you deny there's a God, is that life can arise from non-life. That life can arise from non-life. Again, evolution is put forth as things evolving from less complicated life to more complicated life. You know, dogs into horses, and and I don't know if it's still monkeys into humans. I think I've heard maybe that's not anymore. But it's that concept, less evolved to more evolved, less complicated to more complicated. Well, here's the problem. How did life itself first start? Again, you got the first question, how did there even matter become out of nothing? And they say, oh, well, quantum fluctuations. Okay, now we've got matter. But to go from non-living to living is a huge, huge jump. And even secular, atheistic scientists admit that. In the article written in February 28, 2011, John Horgan, the article is entitled, "Psst, Don't Tell the Creationists, but Scientists Don't Have a Clue How Life Began." He said he wanted to, he's reprinted this article from in the past. In the past, his editor wouldn't let him use that title, but the new editor let him use it. And he was honest and just said it. Okay, when you go that, it gets like water on your screen, so the whole thing. Here's what he says. He is looking back, John Horgan, on, again, something that someone else has said. Dennis Overby just wrote a status report for the New York Times on research into life's origin based on a conference on the topic here at ASU, again, in February of 2011. He says, geologists, chemists, astronomers, and biologists are as stumped as ever by the riddle of life. The leading scientific minds who deny God got together. How do we explain how life came from non-life and they're just as stumped as ever? The following paragraph is from the article he cites. The rapid appearance of complex life in some accounts. So most people who, again, have this view, life rose from non-life, they all agree as they look at the fossil record thing, life didn't just start a little bit, it just all of a sudden there wasn't and then there was. One person says, like Athena springing from the head of Zeus, in the words of Dr. McKay. The rapid appearance of complex life in some accounts has rekindled interest recently in a theory fancied by Francis Crick, one of the discoverers of the double helix. That life, here's his theory, originated elsewhere and floated here through space. These days, the favorite candidate for such an extraterrestrial cradle is Mars, which was once a water world. So how did life arise from non-life? Well, it came here from Mars. Now, even John Horgan admits, of course, panspermia, which is the idea of life coming from somewhere else, those theories merely push the problem of life's origin into outer space. If life didn't begin here, how did it begin there? He admits. You still got to figure out how did it come from there. Now, creationists, here's how he closes his article, are no doubt thrilled that origin of life research has reached such an impasse. That's him talking. But they shouldn't be. Here's how he wraps it up. Their explanations suffer from the similar flaw, what created the divine creator? At least scientists are making an honest effort to solve life's mystery instead of blaming it all on God. So he says, you creationists got the same problem. We don't know how life came from non-life, but you don't know how a creator appeared. Well, and here's the answer. That's part of the definition of God. And they aren't going to like that answer, but again, it's part of the definition of God. It's, we know about God's omnipotence and omniscience. Another trait of God we don't talk as much about is aseity. It's a living being who arises from its own. It's not created. It is self-created, self-existent, always existent. So there never was a time. Again, we can't think about that, but you also have to think about time. Time's created. And so, it really messes with you. But that's part of the definition of God. Now, of course, again, atheists don't like that, but it's true. Now, I watched part of a debate and the atheist in this debate, Richard Sherman. Basically, the question was, what's your explanation of the origin of the universe or the origin of life? And at the very beginning of the debate, he says, God is not an acceptable answer. The supernatural is not an answer. It's a placeholder when you don't know what the answer is what he called it. Well, he's got no right to say that. That's his supposition, his idea to rule out God before you even start the debate. He didn't really do a good job as I watched it. And then he said later, regarding the origin of life in the universe, humility is called for. I thought, really? You've just said with absolute certainty it can't be God. But boy, we need to be humble about what we claim we know. He made no sense. But that's what is. You have to believe. If you deny God, you have to have faith that life can arise from non-life, and that is a huge amount of faith because the leading scientists in the world have no answer. Their best guess is it came from Mars. Okay? So that's the first two things. Third, to deny God, you have to have faith that design happens without a designer. Design happens without a designer. And just realize how foreign a concept that is. Whenever we encounter design, when you walked in here today and you saw these chairs in a row, did you think there had been an earthquake or a wind blow through and all the chairs lined up in a row? Of course, that's your first guess, right? No, you see design. Someone must have set up the chairs. You walk in a room and you see like 3 blocks on top of each other. What do you think? Someone must have put those blocks. They didn't just fall in 3 of them, let alone, 10. We were playing some dice game the other day, and Lisa had, we kept coming up with these variations, and hers was you had to stack 10 dice, and Charlie and I, we couldn't do it. Ours always fell over. Yeah, stupidest thing, version of the game. But if anyone sees 10 dice stacked up on top of each other, no one walks by and says, wow, they fell that way. No, someone must have put them that way. Do you see what I'm saying? We never look at any design and assume, wow, it just happened. But we're going to talk about that one too. The second law of thermodynamics. You and I are on the same page. We're ready. People look at the greatest design ever, the universe. And down to the smallest thing, DNA and amino acids, all these things. Oh yeah, but that happened by accident. There was no designer for that. 7 dice, 10 dice stacked on top of each other, that requires a designer. But this all in DNA, that just happened. Really? And I'm the one walking by faith. And you think you've got something else. That takes a lot of faith. Matter of fact, it took so much faith, it turned the atheist Antony Flew. You remember the person I always cite who debated the resurrection? Antony Flew, the atheist philosopher, and Gary Habermas, the Christian. Gary Habermas won the debate. Antony Flew was that atheist. He converted. I don't know that he ever made it to Christianity, but he converted from atheism, and that reason is he abandoned atheism because of the complexity of DNA. So there is no way that happened by accident without a designer. There had to be a designer just for DNA. Converted him because he looked there. The related idea is the second law of thermodynamics. You might think, well, I didn't know there was a first law. I think actually there's 4 laws of thermodynamics, but the main one that applies here is the second law of thermodynamics. States that as energy is transferred or transformed, more and more of it is wasted. The second law also states that there is a natural tendency of any isolated system to degenerate into a more disordered state. What does that mean? It means if you take any system, if no one is putting forth energy, putting in energy to make it more organized, it's going to get less organized. You want an example? Don't clean or dust your house for a week. Does it get cleaner? No. It gets dirtier. Leave your car outside in the weather for a while. Does it get shinier and newer and run better? No. This law applies to nature, but what it's saying, again, even if somehow through these fluctuations of Planck's, matter came into the world with a big bang, the second law of thermodynamics says if no one's there orchestrating things and putting them together, it's not going to get more complicated and more organized, it's going to get less. That contradicts all of evolution. It says without a creator, without a designer, once this matter came into being, something from nothing, okay, I'll give you that. It got more organized on its own. Violates the second law of thermodynamics, which all scientists recognize. And then a couple others I've mentioned before, but they're worth noting. If you have faith that there's not a God, you have to have faith that not a single religious experience has been genuine. Throughout all of time, all of history, all the people who claim to have had some encounter with God, whether they've seen Him, whether they've heard Him, whether they just see their life and see, wow, look how God's orchestrated it. Now, I will be the first to tell you, I deny many of those claims when people say, someone says, God spoke to me. Yeah, that puts my, red flag up really high. But think about it. All the claims throughout history, millions of claims. If even one of them is true, if one person in all of history had some experience with God, what's that mean? There is a God. Even if every other claim is false, if one is true, there is a God. That's pretty powerful. It's not what you think. It's not very complicated, not very, philosophical, but that one's pretty powerful. And then the last one that I'll mention, again, to deny there's a God, you have to have faith there's a credible alternative for Jesus' resurrection. Now we're in the realm of historical event, not just, how the universe and time Planck fluctuations. This is a historical event or not, but you base it on how do you judge any other historical event. It's a lot easier to talk about. It's subject to objective evaluation. Matter of fact, this one is so strong, that same atheist in that argument, Richard Sherman, at the beginning of his propositions, he puts forth, I'm not going to talk about the resurrection because it's not relevant. Well, how convenient. Gene and I are going to debate whose football team is better, but you can't talk about quarterbacks. See, she's like those scientists who don't want to talk. You can't talk about quarterbacks. How meaningful of a discussion of two football teams can you have if you leave out the quarterback? I know, we'll see. Because they'll have a few weeks without quarterbacks. And who would want to exclude the quarterback? Probably the person whose team doesn't have a good quarterback versus the one who... The atheist wants to leave out of this discussion the resurrection. Well, the Christian came back and said, no. You don't get to say it's irrelevant. It's the most relevant thing. If Jesus died and rose from the dead, it proves there's a God. And I've got more evidence for it than you've got against it. It's on the table. Do you see all the things you have to have faith in to deny there's a God? Again, it's not faith versus facts. Don't ever let yourself get in a discussion with someone and think, well, I just have faith. And let them sound superior. Well, I've got the facts. No. Both of you, if they deny God, you believe in God, both of you are operating based on faith. Belief based on evidence. And you know what? Seems like there's a lot more evidence for God. Just look at it. Put the evidence out there. See what they think. But again, if you're discussing this with someone, and do it, speak the truth in love, but don't ever back down and assume that your position is inferior and all you have is faith. They do too. Matter of fact, just even to use that word, because people might say, I don't believe there's a God, but just to say to them, you don't have faith that there's a God? You have faith in evolution? They don't hear that language. Faith is sort of put, we might believe, I don't believe my team's going to win this or that. We use that in general, but not faith. I don't have faith my team's going to... Use that word for them. It changes the whole discussion. You don't have faith? You have faith in evolution? Wow. That takes a lot of faith. Let's see what they say. The next thing, again, what do people have to deny or have faith in if they deny there's a God? The second question is, what do people who deny God have to ignore? If you deny there's a God, what do you have to ignore? What do you have to try not to think about? Two key things. First of all, without God, there is no meaning to life. If you deny there's a God, you've got to try to downplay or totally ignore the fact there's no meaning to life. We'd all like to know the question of how life came about, but we demand an answer to why life came about. What is the meaning of life? People throughout history, you have to know that one. And they've also realized, and you hear, again, people who don't believe in God, you hear them at moments of honesty. You know, their godless answers to that, like more stuff, they realize that's not the meaning of life. It doesn't leave me fulfilled. It's not my purpose. They've tried all the stuff. And that's because, ultimately, without God, there is no meaning to life. Because think about it. If there is no creator, that means there is no intention or reason for life. If there's no one who said, I'm going to create because, if it all happened without that, that's the definition of an accident. No intention. The definition of an accident is any event that happens unexpectedly without a deliberate plan or cause. Well, by its very nature, an accident has no purpose. Accidents don't happen. I mean, they might happen for a reason in the sense you did something that led to an accident, but an accident totally on its own doesn't happen to create a purpose, to give meaning. It can't. And so you think about it, life if it hasn't been created by God, life has no meaning, it has no purpose. How many people who deny God even realize that? Let alone live consistently with that belief. And what would consistently look like? If you deny God and you deny there's meaning and realize, okay, there's no meaning to life, what would that look like? Well, fortunately, we have a quote by Bertrand Russell, and we've heard of him before too. You remember the guy who set out to prove that 1 + 1 is 2? And it had hundreds of pages? Bertrand Russell was that guy. Well, he wasn't just a mathematician, he was a philosopher, and he was an atheist, and here's what he said. That mankind, is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving. So causes which didn't say, here's the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. Causes that had no prevision of the end they were achieving. That man's origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocation of atoms. Atoms bumped into each other accidentally in just the right way, and that's how we got here. And that's what evolution says. They just don't usually say it as eloquently as that. That no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. No matter what you do, when you're dead, you're dead. That all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system. What you do, the greatest achievements of humanity, it's all going to explode one day and be gone and forgotten. And that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, in other words, you can't prove it, but if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. No one who says there is life after death, there is meaning, there is purpose, if that's your position, you don't have a leg to stand on. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation be safely built. Safely, because we know it's true. Not absolutely, but we're pretty certain life is hopeless and meaningless, and get over it. At least he's consistent. You got to give him that. He at least realizes without a creator, there is no purpose, there is no meaning. We're dying and we'll be dead. The universe will blow up. Hopelessness. That's what you live your life around. I'm an accidental collocation of atoms. I have no meaning. At least he's consistent. Most people don't realize that. If you deny God, there is no meaning to life. Now, you can attribute meaning to life, and most atheists do. I'm going to try to help people. I'm going to try to do my best. I'm going to make money. You can attribute it, but what I'm saying is there's no inherent meaning. No intrinsic meaning to life. You've just said, here's what I'm going to do. The second thing, which in a way builds on it, is without God, there is no basis for morals for life. If you deny there's a God, there is no basis for morals. Morals are principles with respect to right or wrong conduct. Without God, there is no absolute basis. Now, I'm not saying all atheists are immoral. I'm saying there's no absolute basis for right or wrong if you deny that there's a God. When the world first reaction is there's no moral absolutes. They say, good, we don't want moral absolutes. We're glad there's no moral absolutes. The problem is they don't realize a couple things. First of all, they don't realize that relativism, the opposite of moral absolutes is moral relativism. They don't realize, as a professor of mine used to say, it's self-referentially absurd. Because if you say there are no moral absolutes, what are you saying? There absolutely are no moral absolute principles that are absolutely true all the time, except that principle there, that there absolutely are no moral absolute principles that are absolutely true all the time. That one's absolutely true all the time. But there are none. So it's self-referentially absurd. Write that down. That's a good. You throw that out at someone, it'll make them stop and think. Isn't that self-referentially absurd? Also, they don't realize there is no basis for limiting actions whatsoever, for condemning actions or limiting actions. For example, Hitler. Was what Hitler did, was it bad? This is an easy one. Yes, of course. What if, and people today are saying, hey, cultures change, people look at things differently, we're all growing and evolving. What if down the road, the world took a vote, and 51% of the world said what Hitler did was acceptable? The majority of people. Would what Hitler did still be bad?
Technically, he never did it.
That's a whole nother story.
He used people.
Would what Hitler did be bad and evil if 51% of the world said it's okay? Well, you'd have a hard time making that case, wouldn't you? If 51%. And say, go even to the extreme. However it happened, let's say that in the world, down the road, in history, every person on the planet said what Hitler did was acceptable. Would it be acceptable?
Acceptable is different than good or bad,
No,
though.
good. That's what I mean. It's good. Instead of abhorrent, instead of evil, acceptable, good.
That's
Yeah.
like having somebody tell you it's okay to steal a pack of gum when you know it's not right.
Well, how do you know it's not right?
People just know, get a sense for it. It's not like,
But there's no basis for that without God. There's no way to say what Hitler did was wrong unless you ultimately appeal to an absolute standard. Again, and that's why I use the illustration. If 51% of the people said what he did was good, would it be good? And most people would not want to say in any sense what Hitler did was good. And definitely if you get to 100%, every person in the world, most people would not want to say what he did was good. But you've got no basis for saying it was evil if you deny absolutes that come from somewhere other than just we all decided. The other side of that, not only can you not condemn actions, you can't limit. What's the usual limit? It doesn't matter what you do as long as no one gets hurt. You ever heard that one? Okay, next time you hear it, you know what your response is? Says who? Says who? Who came up with that? I didn't come up with that. You know what? I got one life to live. Combine these two. There's no meaning to life. I got one life to live, and then when I'm dead, I'm dead. And quite honestly, if I hurt you and it gets me more money, it gets me more pleasure, it gets me more power, who are you to say I'm wrong? This is my life. You do with yours what you want to, I'm going to do with mine what I want to. Don't hurt people. That's just a bunch of sissies that got together and voted because they weren't strong enough to stand up and hurt someone else. Try to deny that without appealing to God. You can't. There is no basis for morals, but the majority of people don't realize that. They go through life, as long as you don't hurt anybody, and don't realize.
I couldn't figure out what happened with the basis of morals during the Crusades. That was 400 years.
That was,
Following the Bible.
it's a huge thing. The whole Crusades were a response to, the Muslims took over things first, and the Crusades were to retake what they took, but along the way they did things. There's a total difference between perverting morals, between, slavery. Slavery is wrong, especially, the form that happened in the United States. And even Hitler. Hitler made a case for why it was right. The majority of the world rejected it. So that's wrong. Majority of the world would reject some of the things that happened in the Crusades. The majority of the world would reject slavery. But that's people, and even Christians saying we believe in truth, but we've skewed it. We've interpreted, and that's going to be, we're going to look at next week, the Bible. What's it say? Is there a God? Is the Bible His Word? What's it say? What's it say about slavery? What's it say about any subject? But people who deny there's a God, they have no basis to condemn the Crusades. They have no basis to condemn anything because there are no moral absolutes. But yet they still try to condemn things. They're always, the whole Cecil the Lion thing. Really? You deny God. What basis do you have to say it's wrong for a guy to shoot a lion? Even if he did, and whatever the facts are, even if he did trick it. You have no basis. All you can say is, I prefer you wouldn't. Well, I prefer I did. Okay? You go live your life, I'll live mine. You've got no basis. They just don't realize that. So now, here's the thing you need to realize. Neither one of those, the fact that without God there's no meaning or no morals, proves there's a God. Neither one of those. You say, oh, well, there must be a God. No, Bertrand Russell said, I deny there's a God, I deny there's meaning to life, but I still deny there's a God. I'm okay with that. Neither one of them proves, but it's something to consider, and I guarantee you most people who deny God haven't considered them. They haven't considered the implications of denying God. Like, do you realize there's no meaning to life? Do you realize there's no basis for morals? No. They haven't, I guarantee you. And so it's something you can discuss with them to help them consider their position, because most people, again, haven't made their mind up based on the facts. They've made their mind up based on what they want. I don't really want there to be a God. I don't want there to be moral absolutes. Why? Because I can do whatever I want. Well, then challenge them at that level. Okay, it means anyone could be able to do whatever they want, including hurt you, hurt the person you love. Why can you say that's wrong? Just because all you can say is, I'd prefer you wouldn't. So it's a place to start. Key ideas that come from this, just to wrap it up. First of all, there is a legitimate, reasonable basis for belief in God. Please get that. If you get nothing else today, realize that belief in God or no belief in God, they're both based on faith. Your position as a Christian, as a theist, someone who believes in God, is as much based on faith as the position of an atheist. Belief based on evidence, and I think we've got more evidence. And now you see some of it. The second key idea is denying God's existence has serious implications that most people are unaware of or choose to ignore. How many people that you know who deny God, if you ask them, how many do you think would say, oh, I know there's no meaning to life? Oh, I know there's no basis for morals. They haven't. Bring it up to them in that discussion. Well, as always, I think there's a root problem to both key ideas. I think, one, most people just don't know that that faith in God is based on evidence, and denying God means there's no basis for meaning or morals. I think most people don't know that, but the root problem is most people don't care. Quite honestly, they haven't stopped to think about it. People today know far more about their favorite sports teams. They know far more about a band they like or their job, which they've had to study and learn, and that you have to, than the nature of the universe. And granted, it can get a little complicated, but the basics aren't. People just don't care, or they don't want to know, because the implications, again, if there is a God, I'm obligated to live the way He says. And so what's the key to overcoming? Well, I'd say if you haven't put forth effort to know, realize the implications of God. He's the creator of the universe. How can you say it's unimportant to find out something about Him? He's the sustainer. He keeps it going. The Redeemer. He sent His Son. That's the claim made about God. You can't just say, well, either way, it's not important. No, it's the most important thing there is. I need to find out about it. If you haven't put forth the effort, realize that. And if you don't want to know, bring this up to someone. Not knowing doesn't change things. Every year around April, I don't want to know what the tax rate is. Drives me nuts when I think about that much money going out. Guess what? Not knowing doesn't change the tax rate. Does it go away? Because, well, I didn't know. No, it's still there. It's still a reality. Not knowing, not wanting to know about God doesn't change the fact there's a God and there are moral implications. What do I need to do now? I would ask this question. Am I living like I believe there's a God or there isn't? And I think at first we're all going to say, well, of course I'm living like there is a God. But how consistent are we? You know what? If I asked you, are you living like you believe you can fly or not? When's the last time you stepped off a 10-story building? No, because I don't believe I can fly, so I don't do those things. I don't believe I can breathe underwater, so I don't, dive down with a rock tied to my leg or what. I live consistently with those beliefs. All right, I believe there's a God. How consistently do I live with that belief? Day in, day out, do I live a life that reflects the fact there is a God? And then, of course, what's that God like? If there's a God who says, hey, live your life and don't even think about me, then maybe I'm doing fine. But if there's a God who says, I created you and there's a purpose to life, and I demand to have the part that God deserves in your life, how am I doing with that? That's a different question. And it's one we need to think about. Again, and this isn't just, okay, oh wow, I need to try to be good. No, it's if I'm not living life like there's a God, I'm missing out on peace and joy. I'm missing out on the life that God wants me to have. I don't want to miss out. I believe there's a God, and I believe there's a God who created me to have a relationship because He loves me. I don't want to miss a thing. I don't always live consistently with that. Well, as we start to live it out, you'll notice I put there, what does it look like? This is where we, let's process this. This was a deep sermon at times. Self-referentially absurd, remember that. But some of the quantum fluctuations and things, how do I put that into practice in day-to-day life? How do we take this sermon, love your neighbor, okay, I get that one, but this sermon, how do we take this sermon and live it out day to day? How does it make a difference in our lives?